Today, we're going to be talking about behaviors that could lead you to a flare. And I'm going to be covering all the ways that I believe I've caused my own flares in the past. My name's Jacob, and I've been diagnosed with ulcerative colitis for over 10 years. So I've got a lot of experience with finding out what has caused me to flare. So the first behavior which has reliably caused me to flare is stress. Every time that I've let myself get too stressed, it's always led to a flare. So that could be allowing situations to get into your head. Like right now, I've allowed myself to get too stressed. I've been trying to set up the lights to light this whiteboard, and I just couldn't get it right. And it was really, really irritating me. And I let myself get too stressed. So I'm going to put a little star there because this one, very important. And I believe over the years, stress has caused me to have a number of flares. For instance, the first flare that I had ever had before I was diagnosed was caused by stress. I had this huge stressful incident when I was working a job that I hated and I really didn't want to be going in and working that job every day. It got to the point when I was begging my boss, I was begging him, I was saying, I'll pay you for a day off. And it didn't happen. And then I started seeing blood when I went to the toilet. So I truly believe that stress is one of the biggest causes of getting into a flare. So one way of managing stress is to actually just take some time out. Really think about the ways that you're behaving. Take a step back and look at it and just think, is it really this bad? Should I really be stressing out? And stress, yes, it's one of the biggest causes. I truly believe if you're able to reduce your stress, the likelihood of flares is going to diminish. Now, it's impossible to remove stress from your life because stress comes in all forms. But if you can minimize it the best you can, just think about your actions. It's going to reduce that chance for a flare. The next one is anger. Too many times have I let anger get in the way, and I've noticed very quickly after being angry that I've started flaring. So this could be when I used to do skateboarding a lot, I got very perfectionist over it. If I didn't do a kickflip the way that I thought that I could potentially perform it to my best, I'd get very angry. If you ever saw me skateboarding on the seafront, I'd be throwing my board around, swearing, getting so angry that I got a headache, and that would lead me to a flare. And it's just not a healthy thing to do. Yes, you can, obviously, like stress, you will get angry in your life, but don't let anger completely take over you. And I think because I've got a bit of a red streak in my hair, I've got a bit of a fiery attitude, and sometimes I can get very angry. And I do truly believe that this can also cause a flare. Now, anger isn't necessarily a bad thing. You can channel it into making change in your life, channel it into performing the way that you want to perform. So anger's a sort of double-edged sword, but don't let anger just consume you for a pointless situation because it can lead you into a flare. So the next way that I think could lead to a flare is poor diet. So for instance, I used to eat a lot of takeaway. I used to eat lots of like Indian takeaways, Chinese takeaways, kebabs, pizzas. My diet was terrible. And I was young at the time. I was in my early 20s and I thought it was making no impact on me. But diet, I'm going to underline that, it can make a huge impact because the foods that you're eating can set you up for poor health and prepare you to enter a flare. So I really think it's really important to look at your diet. What are you eating? And I knew I was eating terribly when I was eating all these takeaways, but I just didn't care. I hadn't learned that these lessons, I hadn't integrated these lessons into my life. And I really, like now, I take very, very good care of my diet. And it's one of my, where I put a lot of my energy and time. And it has truly made me feel a lot better. But I do believe that if you let yourself be in poor health because of your diet, a flare is bound to come at some point. And I think that's why I was in and out of flares throughout most of my life with ulcerative colitis, because I just didn't take priority for my diet. Takeaways, oh God, so much. Like say I used to love chicken kormas. They're very sweet. There's probably a lot of sugar in those. And it's got, you're eating all this rice and who knows? I wasn't eating much good stuff. Probably small amounts of protein, like little bits of chicken, but most of it is not going to heal you. So diet is definitely one of the ways that can cause me to flare, and it has reliably. All these things have caused me to flare a number of times. The next thing is not being on the correct meds. And I see meds as a great tool to get you out of a flare. But if you are letting stress, anger, and diet get you into a flare, you are really going to have to lean heavily on the meds to get you out of the flare. And that's why I see medications as a tool to help you get back into a non-flare state. But let's say a flare is coming, you entered that flare state for whatever reason, might not be a reason that I've even listed here, but you've entered a flare, not being on the right meds is going to perpetuate that flare, make that flare last longer. So it is really important when you're looking at your medications is to actually think, is this actually helping me? And if it's not, then really you need to ask your healthcare provider to try out a different medication. Experiment with different medications. There is time to experiment with them. If you're in a mild flare, you're not actually in immediate peril. So there's time to experiment with medications and find what works for you. And you want to give it, let's say, a 2-week horizon. When you try a new medication, has anything changed in the past 2 weeks? Has your symptoms improved? If not, then maybe it's time to think about a different medication. You shouldn't be sitting there for months taking the same medication and thinking, nothing's changed. I'm going to keep taking this medication and hope for the better. I just think maybe that medication's not working for you. But it's very important that you have these conversations with your doctor or healthcare specialist, like your specialist nurse, whoever it may be that you're in communication with. Very important that you bring this up to them. Otherwise, you're going to end up in a flare. Now, the next one, this one might seem a bit strange, but communication. And what do I mean by communication? So, like I just said, I highly suggest if your medications aren't working, you keep communication strong with your healthcare provider. If this communication breaks down and you're not telling them the true full picture of what's going on, they might not be able to give you the correct medication to bring you out of that flare. So focusing on your communication skills, talking about your problems, make a note of what is going on, when it's happening, what you think might be causing it. Just note it all down, and that's all evidence and information that you can bring to your healthcare provider. And that way these two are sort of very interlinked. So for instance, a time when medication has really helped me is when I was on the medication prednisolone, and I hated it. This medication was sending me a bit crazy. So the healthcare specialist actually offered me an alternative called budesonide. I haven't not spelt that right, but budesonide. I was able to switch from prednisolone to budesonide, and I tried that out for 2 weeks, and I found that it didn't work again. So I told my healthcare specialist with my communication, I said, this medication is not doing anything for me. Can I try something else? And they said, well, why don't you try, you didn't like prednisolone, the oral pills, why don't you try a pred enema? And I tried that, and you know what? The pred enema actually did stop me from that flare. It actually healed that flare. So that's an instance where communication actually got me out of the flare. But if I had not communicated that with my healthcare specialist, this would have just enhanced the flare and made it so much worse. So these are the ways that I think are going to cause you to flare. Stress, definitely. If you're allowing yourself to get far too stressed, it's going to end up causing you a flare. If you're angry, that's going to fuel a flare. It just has this impact on your body. When you're angry, it spikes your cortisol, which lowers your immune system, which could be useful, but then that's only a temporary thing, and then your immune system comes straight back online when the cortisol wears off, and that's when the flare starts to kick in. And then your diet, that's a really, really important one. This one needs a big, big star. Your diet can play a huge factor. And this one is something you want to play around with. Try different foods. See what makes you feel better. But if you are constantly in and out of a flare, it might be time to actually look at what you're eating. How, are you really eating the foods that your body wants to have fueling it? Are you drinking alcohol? All those sort of things. You need to be on the right medications to get you out of a flare. And you need to tell people if those medications are not working for you. And if you're able to do all of these things, hopefully you're going to be at a point when flares are no longer happening. So I hope that's helped you, and thanks for watching.